Okay, let me try that again. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar on the do's and don'ts of pig farming in Sydney. I'm Janine Ryan, the editor of Farmers Weekly. And for this webinar, we bring you experts in the field of pig farming to discuss the production challenges and opportunities in the pig farming sector. With input costs increasing furiously, it's becoming more and more difficult to run a profitable pig operation, and we hope to shed some light on the realities of pig farming in South Africa during this webinar. So before we begin, I'm just going to go through a bit of housekeeping. The first thing is that we'll speak to the panelists, and after we've had discussions with the panelists or discussions amongst us, we'll open the floor to the audience. So if you have any questions, you can just type them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then hopefully we'll be able to get through all of them or as many as possible at the end of the webinar. Then before we begin, also, I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So just state your name and your role within the pig farming sector. So we'll begin with Pulani.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Pulani Sabutuma. I work for the ARC in the division of pig nutrition and management. So our role is basically to support pig farmers, and we derive our mandate from the government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pulani. CP?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Siapia Creek. I'm from Taibush Piggery. We operate a commercial piggery and a stud breeding unit as well, a nucleus breeding herd. And we basically involved in the pig production cycle from feed milling up to slaughtering at the abattoirs and then supplying pig genetics to South Africa and Africa, and quite involved with the technology surrounding pig production and traceability as well.
And Dr. Peter Evans, last but not least.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's Dr. Peter Evans. I'm a veterinarian and I am at SAPO, the South African Pork Producer Organization, where I head up our consumer assurance program. And part of my brief is veterinary liaison with National Veterinary Services in an attempt to promote national pig herd health.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the basics of pork production for people who are perhaps not in the industry. So Pulani, let's start with you. Can you talk us through different phases of pig production?
Okay, thank you so much, Janine. I'm going to describe the different phases that are involved in pig production, and this is going to be guided by the type of farming system that the farmer is involved in. So there are several systems that farmers can be involved in. It's either they do farrow to finisher, or they just do pig fattening. So for farrow to finisher, these are the type of farmers that would have pigs from all ages. So they will have the breeding stock. This will be our boss and our sows. They manage them as well as they raise the pigs that they are able to get from their breeding stock. They raise them up to market stage. So basically the different phases then that are involved in this particular setup of operation is that the farmer manages the breeding stock and ensures that the boss and the sows, they're able to perform. And performance, we're looking at reproductive performance, the ability to be able to get their sows pregnant as quickly as possible, and there are as few returns as possible, meaning the sows are able to get pregnant as quickly as possible and there are no delay days. So then this also fits also into at a later stage that in a year, there are particular targets that a sow is supposed to achieve. So that is the first stage. And when you also look at the boar, it's then looking at managing processes where the boar is always ready to be able to service the sow when a sow is brought into the servicing pen, and also looking at managing the resting periods in between the servicing for the boar. And then once the sow is pregnant, she moves now to the second stage of production now, which is pregnancy, and it takes about 3 months, 3 weeks and thereabout. And then after this period, there are processes that are involved, and these processes, they are farmer operation independent, of course, different vaccination programs and getting the sow ready to be able to move into the farrowing house. And then after it moves into the farrowing house, which will be a week before the sow is supposed to farrow. And then what happens is during the farrowing, in the farrowing house, the sow is taken care of by an attendant in the farrowing house. And then once she gives birth or she farrows and gets piglets, there are also processes that are involved in managing the sow as well as the piglets that are born. So we're looking at issues of nutrition, you're looking at issues of providing the necessary medication to ensure that the piglets are able to survive to the next stage. And the next stage now also, it only applies now to the piglets. After maybe a month or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, depending on the management processes that the farmer has put in place. So they can wean their piglets either 3 weeks or 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on how robust their management system is. And then from that point on, they move to the grower and the finisher stage up until they go to the market. So those are the different system or processes or phases that are involved in a system that we call farrow to finisher. And then for people who are only looking at fattening pigs now, the system where they only fatten pigs, they will buy their pigs from other farmers that are breeding, and they sell their piglets at weaning stage, and then they sell them off, and then another farmer takes over the growing process until market stage. So this is basically how the different phases are structured.
Thank you, Plani. And can you just perhaps elaborate on problems that farmers may experience with farrowing, for example? Yeah, let's start with that first. I'll ask a follow-up question afterwards.
Okay. So basically, with the farrowing in the farrowing house, what is important is it's for the attendant, the person responsible for looking after the sows when they go into the farrowing house, to ensure, because once they move into the farrowing house, the attendant has an estimated period or date when the sow is supposed to farrow. So if the date comes and nothing happens, or during the process of farrowing, when they realize that the sow is having challenges, this is when they're supposed to call in help or either assist the sow if it's having difficulty farrowing, or alternatively call a vet to come and assist in the process of farrowing itself, so that they can reduce the number of mortalities that can be experienced during the farrowing process. And another important thing is, once the piglets are born, another important thing is also to ensure that the piglets are able to suckle as early as possible, so that they can get the very first milk that they call colostrum, so that they can be strong and improve their chances of survival. So those are some of the few things that are important once the sow is in the
okay. And how big is a litter on average?
On average, okay. The average size of a litter, it will depend on a couple of things. So the size of litter, it would be related or correlated to the breed, the particular breed of the sow. So there are some sows that are highly prolific, so they will give you a very big litter size. So it can be anything between 10 and it used to be 16, but now some of the lines within the different breeds, they have been improved that you can even get up to 22 piglets in a litter. So really now, when you're looking at the number of piglets to expect, it means you also need to look at the genetic potential and of the sow that you have acquired for the farm.
Okay, and so on the topic of breeds then, what are the most common breeds used in South Africa?
So in South Africa, we have 3 top commercial breeds. So your large white, your South African landrace, and your Duroc. And at any pig production setup, you're going to find a combination of these 3 breeds at different combined in different levels. So most of the time when you look at our sows, you would find that with the sows, it's mostly F1 sows, which will be a combination between your landrace and your large white. And then because and the whole concept or the whole idea of mixing these 2 breeds is to take advantage of the good characteristics that you will find in a large white as well as in a landrace. So you're combining these good characteristics and then you put them in. It means you are going to have a sow that is robust in a sense that it is able to give you a good litter size. She's able to raise her piglets up to winner stage with as little as possible mortalities up until you win. And also then now when you look at the product at the end of the growth period, when you look at the product, you'd find that a Duroc is mostly, it will be added as a 3rd breed to service the F1 sows. So, and the whole idea is to improve the quality of the meat or the quality of the product that eventually goes to the abattoir. So those are the 3 main commercial breeds. And then when you look at, because in South Africa we have how do you say it? We have various different production systems. You would find that when you look at subsistence or smallholder farmers, then you would have other breeds that we call indigenous breeds. So it will be mainly your Winsnare, the black one. So when you look at those kind of setup, so it's mainly, you would find it in smallholder or subsistence farmers. And the reason you would find it there is because it's quite hardy and it is able to scavenge and can live on forage a lot. So then farmers, they will keep them mainly for low input and low output kind of system. And then you would find that the number of piglets that you would find from this particular indigenous breeds are very low. So you're looking at about 5 piglets in a litter, and the sows are able to raise them up until winning stage, despite the fact that their owners do not give them feed, do not provide any type of medication. So those are some of the indigenous pigs that you would find. And also another breed that most people will keep as a pet because it has a lot of fat, it's the Goldbrook. So you'd find it's in the zoos or it's a pet, someone is keeping it. And it may be not an economically viable kind of breed. So those are the breeds that we find in South Africa.
So are there other breeds? I'm not all that clued up on pig farming, but in cattle and sheep, for example, we have hundreds of breeds. Is that not the case in pig farming?
Okay. There are other breeds like your Hampshire and in other countries. There are other breeds, but then because pig production is such a niche, it's such a niche and very high intensive in terms of finances and the investment, and even in terms of management, you'd find that farmers would rather go with breeds that have been tested, that they are able to manage and be able to get good litter size and of course make profit out of those particular breeds.
So those three that you mentioned, those ones have been found to be most viable in South Africa.
A different combination would see even with different stud breeders. Even though they will have their own lines, say with it.
Okay. Okay, so Polani, I'll come back to you just now to just speak about some of the research that's being done at the ARC in terms of pig production. But Sepia, let's go to you then about the sort of practicality of pig farming. So can you just give a quick overview again of your operation?
All right, Janine. Yes, I'm going to talk a bit about what we do and how we approach it, and then I'll bring in some general knowledge regarding the bigger industry and maybe international trends as well. So we've got a 2,300 commercial sow unit, and it was built up over quite a period of time. The first buildings were done in the mid 70s, and the latest buildings were done in 2020. So it's a range of quite old buildings and very new, very nice buildings. So I'll come back to infrastructure a bit later, but that's probably one of the first and most important starting points is to have proper infrastructure and biosecurity, because whatever you put into the farm going forward all depends on the capacity and the limitations of your infrastructure. And when you put in pigs and feed, you want them to have the best possible chance of success, and infrastructure is important for that. So the way we do it is, on the commercial farm, we've got three separate sites. We have a predominantly breeding site, a separated weaning site, which is completely closed off and separate, and then we've got a grower finisher site that's on its own again, and we have our own feed mill. So we'll come to feed costs and expenses as well, but feed is the biggest expense of a farming operation. So that's why we do home mixing. We can control the costs and we can control the quality of the feed that we mixed. So we on a weekly batch system. So every week sows are being inseminated. We use almost only artificial insemination. We have an AI lab and station on the farm. So we have our own breeding boars. We have our own lab. We collect semen, go through the whole evaluation and packaging and extension process, and we inseminate with fresh semen. So what we do is about 120 sows are mated every week on the different sites. From there, they go into the gestation phase. We use group housing. So it means that after the second day of insemination, the sows are grouped in batches based on size and weight. They go into different groups. The benefit of that is that the sows get to experience almost like a family setup. So they share a pen, they eat together, they lie together, and that there's quite a big welfare benefit in that. But what we've also seen is that because the sows are more active, a bit more fit, happy in a sense, that it even has quite a positive effect on the production as well. So then they go into the farrowing houses, as Polani mentioned, very intensive. We look at a lot of things to do to make sure that those litters that are born are actually weaned. We look after the sows to make sure they get the right food, water, they maintain condition. Then the weaners are weaned on 28 days. They go to the weaner phase. Again, that's quite a sensitive phase in the pig's life. So they go from suckling and being with the mother to a weaner phase. And there, within 24 hours, you need to get those piglets to start eating and drinking and to carry on their own. That sets them up for success in the rest of their life. Then they stay in the nursery or weaning phase up until 10 weeks of age. By that time, they're well adapted. They started eating. They've grown quite well. We've looked at the gut health. We look at the health of the pigs overall. On 10 weeks, they'll transfer to the grower finisher section. For the first phase, the grower phase, they're on a grower diet. So at that stage, they are mostly on I want to say that's not the easy phase of farming, but the biggest work has been done. They just need to grow, be healthy, drink water, and be happy. Then at around 19, not around, but on 19 weeks of age, we do individual weighing of the pigs. So the model we follow is that we also do individual numbering of our pigs. So even in the commercial herd, each and every pig is numbered. That gives us the opportunity to track that piglet from birth to slaughter. And all the treatments, medications, weighing, everything happens on that individual number. So on 19 weeks, we weigh them, and based on the weights, we then market those pigs to the correct markets. And what we look at is sex, so male, female, we market them differently. We look at the age, we know they're 19 weeks old, and we look at the weight. So we make sure that the fastest growing males go first to the heavy carcass market, and then almost the lightest females that need to clear out the pen, they go to your porker or cutter market. So that helps us to be fairly precise on what we market where. After 19 weeks, they go on a finisher diet. So now it's time to really work on the composition and the carcass quality of the pig to make sure you get a heavy but a fairly lean carcass. And at that time, they're also growing quite well. So your feed conversion rate is good, and you can add a bit more punch into your final ration. And then around 21 to 23, 24 weeks, they are being slaughtered. All the males are slaughtered before 22 weeks. The rest slaughtered on weight. And that's kind of the end of the process. Then we get the grading data back, and we use that to evaluate our process, both from a genetic point of view to determine in our system which combinations and which specific boars are giving us the best carcass, the best growth, the best return on investment. And we also look at feed and different buildings. Where are we getting the best carcass out for the least feed? So talking a bit about the economic side of it, feed is your highest expense, and where we are now in the commodity cycle, it's very expensive. And we can talk about it a bit later, but probably the two biggest cost factors you look at is feed conversion ratio and kilograms produced per sow per year. So at the end of the day, those are the two numbers that really make a pig farm profitable or not. And although the two are related, as we measure pig farms in productive sow numbers, you want to know how many kilograms of cold carcass weight do you produce per year per sow, and how much feed does it take to produce those kilograms. And that's what you manage almost on a daily basis to make sure that you are profitable or not.
Siapia, so you mentioned some infrastructure earlier. So can you perhaps just elaborate a bit on that? What kind of infrastructure do you need? Yeah, okay, let's start with that, and I'll get to free range and organic piggery later.
Yes. So I think to maybe again take a few steps back. Water is water is the most nutrient on your farm, and without water you won't be able to run a very good piggery. So where you base your farm is quite important. You need to have a very solid, continuous and clean water source. Climate does play a role. Pigs are quite climate sensitive, so in the better you can place your pig farm in terms of climate, the easier it will be to control your environment. Then, so zooming in, you need water, you need a fairly good fence. to be biosecure, and ideally, if you can, not too close to other pig farms. If that's not possible, you need to have a fence. So same as security wise, if you are in a very high crime area, you need better fences. The lower the crime in your area, the weaker your fences can be. So that's quite important. Then you need electricity, obviously, or you can go solar, but you need those basic infrastructure. One thing that's often lost in translation is your manure management, because whatever you put in needs to go out again. And you need to plan quite well ahead. What are you going to do with your manure? Because firstly, you don't want to pollute your own water source, because as I said, that's your most important. And you don't want to mess up the environment around you. Not only the water sources, but there's natural water courses, there's soil, all of that needs to be protected. So once you've got all of that sorted, you can start looking at how do you actually raise the pigs. Now, for me, the farrowing house is always the most important building on the farm. That's, in my mind, that's a drumbeat of your business. So whatever goes through the farrowing house is what determines what goes out the end. And that's also your most expensive building per meter or per standing place. So you spend most of your money, and you need to make sure that that building always runs at capacity, and not over capacity, but at capacity. So important things for us in the building is isolation, ventilation, because the better you do isolation, the easier it is to maintain comfortable temperatures. Ventilation, you want to control the temperature, but you also want fresh air flowing through there, and use well slatted floors, or at least partially slatted floors. You immediately give your pigs a much more comfortable environment to live in. It's easier to clean and maintain, and it has a massive impact on the health of your pigs. So whatever you do, those three things are quite important. The buildings you need, the way you set it up differs, but you need an area to mate, you need a mating house, gestation house. I would suggest everybody go towards group housing where possible, because that's the way of the future. We need to get there as soon as possible. You need a proper farrowing house. If you can spend money, spend it on the farrowing house. That's what drives production. You need a weaner section or weaner house, which is smaller in square meter terms. It's nice and warm. The temperatures or the climate there is different than your growers or your sows. And then after that is your grower and your finisher houses. So at that stage, your pigs are more robust. They can take a bit of punch, but that's also where you spend the most cost in terms of feed. So there you would focus much more on feeding and feeding systems to make sure you get your feed to the pigs as quickly as possible, as clean as possible, with as little wastage. And after that, you need a proper loading ramp to actually get your pigs on a truck to get to market. Again, the way you treat your animals from the last day on the farm until they are slaughtered are quite important to achieve good carcass quality and good meat and good eating taste and experience, because you don't want your pigs to be stressed. You don't want them to be chased up and down. You don't want them to slip and fall. You want to deliver a good product at the abattoir. So broadly, that's the infrastructure that you look at. Part of biosecurity, you need to have a shower and office. That's depending on the size of where you are, but you don't want anything to move in and out of your piggery. So you need a place for you and your workers to shower, change clothes, equipment, medicine, etc. stays on the farm. It doesn't leave. It doesn't come in very often. So that's what I would look at on infrastructure.
And just in terms of manure management then, so how do you guys manage that?
All right. So we've got a combination of ways depending on the age of the units. So the most basic way we do it is by means of ponds. So you can have, and this can be soil or earth dams lined to protect the subsoil. We've got a anaerobic pond where there's a bunch of nice chemical stuff happening there. Dr. Evans will help me a bit later on that. And then from there, it goes into our oxidation and evaporation ponds. So the basic principle is all the nice biological and well, the manure and the urine and all the microbes that's in there get together. It is by itself starts to digest. So you break down the solids, it gets to a nice little milkshake form. It flows into the different ponds. You get a little bit of settlement and you get evaporation. So if that is planned out well, it's very easy to construct, a little bit expensive, but with very little ongoing maintenance, and water is just evaporated back into the water cycle. What we also have, which is more on the high-tech side and more expensive side to run and to put up, is we've got a screw press separator system. So the manure goes into a pond, it's pumped up into a press, it literally squeezes the liquids out of the solid fraction, and you end up with a fairly dry solid fraction coming out in the front at about 25% moisture, and you've got very rich, very stinking liquid going out on the side. And then you do one of two things. You compost the solids, and that's a very valuable nutrient-rich compost to be sold or used on production. And the liquids we use to spray out on our fields. You can use it on maize or other fields. We prefer grass and grazing because it's a bit more, it uses the nutrients much more efficiently, which then go back into something like a feeding system for cattle or grazing for lambs or whatever. But you can also just simply sell the produce to your neighbor. And I think going forward, that's probably the best way to look at it, because whatever you take out of the soil, whatever water you pump, you eventually want to reuse into something that can add value. We've got a little pepper production going where we use the liquid fraction as part of a fertigation that we do on the pepper production. And it's quite intensive and difficult, but it was also quite successful. And it fits well with our approach that we can use the liquid manure coming out of the pigs to actually grow crops in a very intensive setup. And within that, there's a few options, but that's what we do.
And I think Farmers Weekly did an article not too long ago on your operation, and if I recall, a lot of it was spent, or a lot of the articles spoke about the type of technology that you use in the operation. Can you maybe just explain the innovative technology that you guys are using? Again,
there's so many areas where you can use technology, but I think ventilation is one area where we like to spend a bit of money on. The better you can do your ventilation, the better for the pigs. And it's as simple as having temperature controlled ventilation. So when it's really cold, all the curtains are closed and the red light goes on, red lights go on to warm up the piglets. And when it's very warm, all the curtains are open and there can be fans and it can be evaporative cooling. But it's a simple form of technology, but it's a very important form of technology. That can go up to some of the systems we have where I can log in from here and view the temperature in a certain pen. I can see whether the curtains are 10, 20, 30% open or closed, the red lights are on or not, what's the air quality in that specific building. But you don't need to go that level to actually have proper ventilation. But that's an area of technology where you can actually see and feel technology at work. Then on the other side, we look at something based on the production side, the traceability side. So we use Cloud Farms. It's a cloud-based pig production system, and that assists us greatly in terms of production recording, traceability from when the piglet was born. The semen that was used is linked to a boar in the AI station. That boar has his pedigree So we know exactly when that piglet is born, everything about his parents and so forth. All the medication usage is tracked on cloud forms per animal. Some is group-based, some medications is group-based, so then it's not per animal, some is individually based, but we keep track of that, and the medicine records are also being recorded from an inventory point of view. So every time you inject an animal, it goes to the animal's record, but it's also subtracted from the inventory in stock. So at the end of the week or month, you can actually go and do reconciliation between what was used on what. And from a traceability point of view and a consumer assurance point of view, it literally prevents us to market animals within the withdrawal period. Because on your tablet or on your phone, if you want to send an animal for slaughter and it's within the withdrawal period, it stops you. It shows alert, you can't send this animal, it's within withdrawal period. So that helps us to make sure we don't get anything into the food chain that's not supposed to be there. And then it goes a bit further where you can do on the genetic side, we use that same data to do performance testing on our animals, to do our selections based on breeding values, based on growth, FCR, etc. And then you've got a bunch of nice reports that you can use. The ones I like is where you have real-time reporting, like in the office or in the canteen or even a farrowing house, where the people working there can see on a smart screen in the canteen, what was the born alive, what was the pre-wean mortality per building, which group or which house weaned the most piglets per litter for the past week. We can look at mortality rates, reason codes, why did pigs die, what's the amount of feed used, what was slaughtered that week. And the last thing, not the last thing, but one of the other nice things we have is a feed management app, where the manager can order his feed on the app. The feed store manager gets the orders. He can sort them based on what you can mix together and what you can't, using flash rations to get rid of antibiotic residues. And once the feed card delivered the feeds, the manager gets a notice to say, here's your order with all the ingredients. It was successfully delivered. And that's what technology do for us. Yeah.
And so you were also talking about, obviously, you need electricity to run all of this. And as everyone here knows, South Africa's got some serious issues with electricity. How do you, what is the impact of load shedding on your operation? Or I assume you've probably made alternative arrangements in terms of solar or some sort of renewable energy. But what is the effect on you, and what do you think the effect of load shedding is on perhaps smaller producers that can't afford that?
So, Janine, I've maybe got a bit of an unpopular opinion on this, and maybe a bit different. So we've, from the beginning, we've invested in generators. Maybe by that time, diesel was still cheap, but a lot of our power requirements is outside sunlight hours. So we've got backup generators on all our sites. At this stage, when we get load shedding, we run on generators. So our production is fairly unaffected by load shedding, but it does have a very big negative effect on our production cost, because diesel generators are more expensive than what we can buy from Eskom. So yes, we're not affected on the production side. It does affect our costs. We know diesel is not the most cheap way, but it is very predictable and consistent. So when you normally, when the power goes off, genset sets in and you can run production. We have not invested in renewable energies and solar yet, maybe because we're in a very, very difficult, big profitability cycle, so there's not a lot of capital lying around. But also, if you look at the return on investment on a solar project compared to a grower building, normally your return on investment on a grower building is quite good. So we would rather build another grower building and buy from Eskom as long as we can, which is not everybody would agree. But for me now, to expand my big capacity production capacity, justifies capital investment more than investing in renewables. That's my view at this stage. I think long term, definitely we would like to invest in solar projects, etc. For now, first of all, we're just buying feed because that's what we need to do now. And if there's capital projects, it might be in production expansion. Yes.
Okay, cool. I think I have heard from lots of farmers that solar is not as reliable as generators because there isn't always sun, or the batteries to store energy is really expensive, etc. So I don't think your opinion is that unusual, actually. Dr. Evans, let's go to you. Can you just perhaps remind everyone, because the beginning was a long time ago, about what your role is at SAPO?
Yeah, so I've started working at SAPO 1 day a week 15 years ago, and I spend most all of my time here. I think let's start on the veterinary health side of it. SAPO is a representative organization for all pig farmers. So we look at, and I think CFP alluded to about biosecurity. So for us, we look at biosecurity at a number of different levels. So the one level is the national level. So South Africa is blessed as a country that has very few viral diseases of pigs. There's diseases like porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome called PRRS. There's classical swine fever. There's Olszewski's disease. There's transmissible gastroenteritis, which affect a number of pig-producing countries in the world. And South Africa doesn't have those. So, and there's only a handful of countries in the world that don't have PRRS. We don't have PRRS. Australia, New Zealand, and the Scandinavian countries don't have PRRS. So we want to protect that national health status as much as possible. So part of what we do with our liaison work with veterinary services is looking at import protocols. So if CFP was telling you he has a genetic nucleus unit, and I think he gets frustrated sometimes, but we have very strict protocols on importing of genetics into the country. So now you cannot import any live genetics into the country anymore. The only way you can get genetics into this country is via frozen semen. So we have 4 basically breeding companies that import frozen semen into the country. And that's the only way they can improve their genetics in this country. And the reason for that is that frozen semen can be stored overseas for a while. Before it's shipped to South Africa, we can do a lot of testing on that, on the donor animals, before they get semen collected from them, and then after they've had semen collected from them. So we're pretty sure that the frozen semen that comes in is not going to bring unwanted visitor, a disease that we don't have. So we also look at imported pork to make sure that imported pork that comes in is not going to be bringing in unwanted diseases as well. So that's really national biosecurity. So we spend a lot of time just ensuring that we know what's happening worldwide, where there are outbreaks of diseases. The US had an outbreak of a piglet diarrhea disease, which cost them enormously. So then we alter our import protocols based on those kind of situations. And then we at SAPO try and there we have what are called notifiable diseases and controlled diseases in South Africa. African swine fever is one of them. Foot and mouth disease is another of them. So we get involved as SAPO as much as possible in liaising on how we can improve our control and management of African swine fever. So doing awareness, trying to drive behavior. And then coupled to that is we, in conjunction with our government, introduced a pig compartment system, 2009, 2010. So it's about 13, 14 years of age. One of the first countries in the world that had a pig compartment system registered. And that is our endeavor to help our farmers protect themselves from getting diseases on their farms. Siepo was telling you a little bit earlier about proper fencing, access control, showering in and out. That's all driven by the compartment system. Then we have other programs around biosecurity that we do, biosecurity assessments for those farms which cannot qualify as a compartment because of their particular location and infrastructure, but it's still important that biosecurity biosecurity is quite simple. It's a way of life. So any level of farming can perform biosecurity. You don't have to be a big commercial farmer to have biosecurity. So it's about keeping the health status of the pig herd as good as possible, because besides feed, health is a big determinant of profitability. If you've got a disease on your farm, it costs you in that the animals don't perform to their genetic potential. And then you also need to treat animals, or you lose animals. There's mortality. So having a disease on a farm is incredibly costly. So we have many units in this country, pig farming units. Of the commercial farms, we estimate about 40% of them are what we would call specific pathogen-free farms. So they have a very, very high health status. And those farms, if you look at records or surveys done by various veterinary practices that specialize in going to these units, the difference in cost is phenomenal on medicines, and production is much better on these farms. So that's really from the veterinary and health side of it. The other responsibility that my section has at SAPO is consumer assurance. It's also a program that has been developed from the early 2000s, and it's all about consumer assurance. So it's looking at welfare. It's a big part of our consumer assurance program. It's looking at residues, so not only antibiotic residues, but also pesticides, heavy metals, anything that could possibly get into the pork, which is harmful to humans. We look at zoonotic diseases. There's we've all had this experience recently with COVID, and we, I guess the jury's still out whether it did come from an interaction in a marketplace with animals and humans, and it's a virus that was transferred from humans, or whether it snuck out of a laboratory. No one knows, but certainly zoonotic diseases are things of importance. Environmental stewardship is incredibly important, and CPO was alluding to the fact that we look at not polluting water sources, a One Health concept. So we call it Pork 360, which is kind of fits quite nicely into the One Health, which is a big circle, the whole world, and all of us are involved in it, whether we animals, humans, and or the planet and plants. So Yeah, we're pretty proud of consumer assurance of our program, and recently I think a lot of people are getting more and more onto this sustainability bandwagon of sustainability for our planet and all of us that live on it. And Pork 360 as a consumer assurance program is answering many of those questions already, and obviously it will continue to develop. So yeah, basically those are the two big things that we're involved in.
So can you just explain the compartmental system, just for people who may not be familiar with it? How does it work?
So stepping back, it used to be called the OIE, it's now called WOHA, the World Animal Health Organization for Animal Health. They have, in their ways of managing global diseases, they have 3 levels of looking at diseases, and that the first level will be a country's free of a disease. For instance, South Africa used to be free of FMD except for the areas around where our game parks are, because FMD is a buffalo disease as well as a cattle disease. So you'd have disease freedom for a country, then they had regional disease freedom, and then they recognized that, and this is many years ago, that you could possibly have a disease-free population of animals, whether it was ostriches, whether it was cattle, whether it was pigs, that were in a defined space. So it has to be they talk about an epidemiological unit that is completely defined. And so really, in simple terms, pig compartment is a defined area. So it would be a set of buildings with a fence around it, and then a whole lot of operational procedures to ensure that the diseases can't get in and or out of that. So compartment really is, I mean, I think probably the best analogy is like a prison. You know, it's got a fence, it's got access control, the animals can't get out, and whatever goes into there is, you know, whatever has to go in is properly controlled. So, you know, if you need to take medicines, then you need to take equipment in, it has to come from a known source, and it needs to be disinfected and cleaned before it gets into that unit, so it's not carrying diseases. And personnel, if you go into a compartment, you dress down to the way you were born, you go through a shower, and you get given clothes and footwear on the other side. So nothing goes in there. I mean, most of these compartments are incredibly strict. They will not allow you to take a cell phone in. You don't take anything. Your jewelry stays out. Anything that potentially could have a little piece of virus on it. Obviously, those kind of units, we do not allow any swill feeding. So they, you know, you can't go and collect restaurant waste and feed restaurant waste, because both foot and mouth disease and African swine fever can be transmitted by meat. People who are allowed to eat on the unit in a canteen, they wouldn't be, unfortunately, allowed to eat pork. So we don't take pork in. You know, chicken might be allowed, or fish, or, you know, some of the other, but not pork, because obviously it's a pig farm. So it's just it's a clearly defined farm unit with very strict protocols, and that's a compartment. We do some testing and so on. So for us, the pig compartment is an important part of our opportunity to export pork from South Africa, because we can give our trading partners assurances that the pigs or the pork that is going out to their countries is derived from a compartment that we know the health status of. So besides, all the protocols, they also have to have regular visits from veterinarians. So we know, there's somebody corroborating the health status. They have to have serological tests to say that they have not had ASF or PRRS or foot and mouth disease in that unit. So yeah, it's strictly complied with. But the purpose of compartments primarily for us is our opportunity to export.
So just talking about exporting, obviously there's been the FMD outbreaks in South Africa, I think since 2019 that they've sort of been ongoing.
Yeah.
Has that affected the pork industry in terms of exports?
It has definitely affected us. One of our biggest trading partners is I hope going to be Namibia. So at the moment there's a moratorium. They're not importing pork from us at the moment. We're hoping to convince them to start up again. We want to try and export to other big pork eating countries in the world, and that would include the East. But they're also a little bit concerned about disease around and African swine fever. We can't, the best we can do is give assurances that we can sell you pork from a known health status. But, trade agreements are determined between two entities, us as the exporter and the trading partner. And every single exporting country has the right to demand its own, importing country has the right to demand its own set of rules or permits that they want from us. So it's not, because you registered with the OIE or it's an individual relationship between two countries that drives imports and exports.
And then in terms of ASF, what is actually happening in terms of ASF at the moment? Because I haven't come across any news about recent outbreaks, but it seems to be something that is probably never going to go away. That's the way it feels, at least.
Putting me on the spot.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
So African swine fever is an interesting disease in the fact that it is one of it's a very unique virus. So it's a DNA virus, and it's incredibly difficult to, and they've been trying for many, many years to develop a vaccine. So we don't have, the only way we can control African swine fever is preventing its transmission into a unit. And the other thing about African swine fever is that it's an incredibly hardy virus. So if a pig succumbs from African swine fever and dies, the virus can stay alive in that carcass for up to 6 months. It also survives freezing. So, if you've now have a pig or a pig that's harboring African swine fever, and the farmer or the owner decides to slaughter that pig and they freeze the meat, if the virus was already present in that meat, it survives the freezing process. And potentially once it's stored, and if pigs were to eat it, would transmit the infection. So we know a lot about African swine fever. We understand the biology of African swine fever, but it's not airborne. The virus, the only way the virus can be spread is if we spread infectious material, by moving meat from one place to another, or if you've been in a pig pen where they're pigs with African swine fever and you've got feces on your boots, or you've got blood on you, or one or other excretion. You go to healthy pigs. As humans, we can transmit it. We call those fomites. So you can transmit it by fomites. So if people were cautious and obeyed biosecurity rules and rules of cleaning and disinfection and downtime between being on one unit and another unit, it would make controlling ASF a lot easier. So, I spent the FAO of the UN does a lot of training in Africa, and I've been involved in a number of those courses, and everybody in the world thinks that the biggest culprit in the transmission of ASF is humans. We could really prevent it. So unfortunately, and driven by economics, it only used to be confined to the northern part of our country, where you have the wildlife cycle, where the warthogs are the reservoirs, and if domestic pigs got in contact with the warthogs or lymph nodes and stuff from warthogs that had been hunted, it would transmit. But unfortunately, what happened is some of the domestic pigs affected with ASF were brought out of the area into the big metropolitan areas where people could sell pigs, whether it was live auctions or slaughter them. And so it moved into Gauteng to start with many years ago, 2012 the first time, and then again in 2016, and now just by human behavior, wittingly or unwittingly, it's moved right through all the provinces. So we don't have a province that's never had ASF. So it's affected all of us. So, good biosecurity, and it doesn't have to be expensive, complicated biosecurity can prevent the transmission of ASF. It's just being clever. Unfortunately, what happens as well is when people start losing pigs from ASF, they but like second-hand cars, they get sold off quickly, or the pigs get harvested or slaughtered, and then meat spread around, and if somebody doesn't eat a piece or a scrap of that pork and it's got ASF and throws it out to pigs, which are scavenging, those you keep the cycle alive. So ASF is simmering. We hear of little outbreaks every now and again in different areas. I mean, we understand the socioeconomic pressures, that people are really struggling. There's unemployment, there's no jobs. It's, we understand why there's so many pigs being kept less formally, or just as food for a household. We understand that, but it is the reason that I don't think, unless big changes happen in our economy and unemployment and the social environment that we're all living in changes, ASF is going to be with us. So you're right, it's not going to go away.
Okay, so then I also want to talk about consumer assurance at abattoirs. So what exactly does that involve?
So for us, if you look at our the value chain of pork production, you start with a farmer, and then pigs would go to an abattoir and then to a processing plant, and then into sort of a wholesale retail market, and then eventually to the consumer. So from a consumer assurance point of view, and being a pork producer organization, and you'll remember a little bit earlier, I talked about the things that are important for us as far as consumer assurance, which include welfare and residues and environmental stewardship. So we can have an influence, and we do have an influence at the abattoir level on things like welfare. So when we register pork 360 or pork abattoirs, a pork 360 abattoir. We want to know that those pigs are kept in welfare-friendly conditions, and that the whole process until they become unconscious, that those, the welfare of those animals is paramount. So that's the influence we have. And then through further down the value chain, it's really about traceability, so that when somebody at a retail level maybe goes in to buy pork, they can inquire from who they're buying their pork from, the butcher, the retailer, where do you source your pork? And our traceability would be sufficient to say, yes, the pork that you're getting from shop XYZ came from a pork 360 assured farm, went through a pork 360 assured abattoir. So that, we have a lot of influence as operationally at the beginning of the chain. We have very little influence at the end of the chain, but that's, we can't manage the retailers. That's not our purview. It's not our sphere of influence. But we do have assured pork available that the consumer could demand from wherever they're buying. If that makes sense, try to keep it simple.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine.
So pork 360 is not a brand. You're not going to see pork 360 as a brand. It's one of the things about in the marketing world, and I'm probably on shifting ground, but most of the people who sell products want to sell it under their own name. They're the holders of the quality of the product. We the holders of the assurance that product is the food safety from a residue point of view, from a zoonotic disease point of view, has been taken care of. That's where we are. We're not in the retail space as SAPA.
So how do you monitor? I mean, how do you keep track of these aspects? So it's quite broad if it includes everything from pig welfare, for example, on farm to slaughtering. How does SAPA go about actually managing this?
So it is a pork producer program, and we are registered under an international certification group. So that international group audits our scheme to make sure that the things we say we're going to do, we do. So we get audited annually by the company we were with, is called CPG. They audit us that we are compliant with the ISO standards that we have registered under. And then at the farm level, we have a group of trained auditors who are also pig veterinarians who understand the pig production process, who do annual audits on all the Pork 360 member farms. And then at the abattoir level, we use the South African Meat Industry Company, SAMIC, who have trained auditors that know how to audit abattoirs, but they audit against our standards. So all of the, where we have big sphere of influence up until the processing plants, we have auditors that are appointed and audit them annually. As far as where our pork would go to in a retailer and so on, they have so many ISO programs that they have to be audited against, that we pretty sure that part of the chain, their HACCPs, their ISO standards are all audited by other personnel. We don't need to worry about them. They'll look after themselves, or they've been looked after. I don't have to look after them.
And then, because I know we're going to get this question, government funding for I don't know, for pig, I assume it's probably more sort of emerging pig farmers, but are there those sorts of programs or initiatives available?
I don't know if Polani wants to answer, but yeah, look, I mean, I think that is probably, you know, we have as SEPO, we have a business development group or business development. So we have 7 business development managers who go out to smaller farmers and mentor them on a regular basis. So kind of an extension service. And one of the biggest questions that get asked, and they also have a lot of farmers' days, which they organize in the different provinces. And one of the questions they asked on a regular basis, where can I get money? CFP alluded to, I mean, at the moment, if you want to put up a commercial pig farm, you're looking at 100,000 Rand per sow place, 110,000 Rand per sow place. So, you know, you can do the maths. If you're going to put up a 1,000 sow unit, that's a significant investment. I mean, that's 100 million Rand. So, putting up a commercial farm is incredibly expensive. So, from the government side, there have been some provincial grants that have been given in the past. The IDC and the PIC also, or IDC rather not PIC, also have some programs, but all of those programs are based on that particular farmer actually having some of their own capital. So they kind of a little bit softer, but they also are commercially based. You know, so you do need to have some of your own equity. You may be able to get some grants. So it's extremely difficult for a small farmer to find finance to immediately get into pig farming on a decent scale. So yeah, it's tough. But SEPO is not a financial organization. We're a service organization to the pig industry, and we provide those services to anybody who's a member of SEPO. And SEPO membership is based on there's a levy that's paid by anybody who sends a pig to an abattoir, or any live pig that gets exported. There's a small levy on that, and that's how we fund it. But we spend we're a service-based organization, so we don't finance. But finance is tough. It's very tough. It's not easy. I don't know if Polani wants to add, because I'm sure she gets a lot of those questions every day.
Polani, do you want to add?
I think, like he said, even us as the ARC, we are not a funding organization. So basically what we do, mainly, we also get a grant from the government. And basically what it's supposed to be doing is give farmers technical advice, service, and those kind of things. And if they need funding, we are just a referral point. Maybe if it's smallholder farmers, will refer them to grants from the government, and those that have some type of their own investment that they would like to make and top it up, then we refer them to other organizations. So yeah, that's a very important question, but we are not the right people to sort of fund.
Peter, I just have another question for you, is that you spoke about a decent scale. What does that mean? Like, how many sows do you have to have for
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's a complicated question. It'll vary from situation to situation. So if the pig farm is your only source of income, so that's your only source of income, you would need to decide as the individual who is running that farm, what kind of return you want, or how much do I need to live a year? And that would determine, and are you prepared to be the general dog's body? You're going to be the manager, you're going to work in the unit. So if that's going to be your only level, you're going to be working day in and day out in your own unit, and you want to be able to send your kids to the local government school, maybe a 300 SAR unit would be sufficient for you. But if you want to be investing into a unit and you want to employ a general manager, then you're going to be looking at much bigger units than that, because there's an economy of scale. And I think Polani and to a degree, Siepie also mentioned that you have specialized functions that happen on pig farms. So the mating, the artificial insemination, the timing of inseminations, it's pig farming is incredibly technical. And I think for those of us who involved, actually I probably didn't mention it earlier, but I also have a pig farm. For those of us involved in it, you get so much satisfaction out of understanding the science of pigs and understanding the biology of pigs. But it requires the personnel who are working in those various sections also to have a passion for the science and the biology and applying that science. So the artificial insemination, which is sort of the beginning point, is incredibly important. That care of the piglets in the farrowing house, making sure they all get to suckle, get colostrum, get enough colostrum, get a good start in life. That's really technical. The weaner phase, getting those piglets adapted to going from drinking mother's milk to eating solid foods, meal or pellets or whatever it is. That also requires a lot of input. So you need to be employing people that are skilled, passionate, and they need to be paid a lot of money. Your general manager gets paid a lot of money. So that is why, the practice that I'm involved in has been doing annual surveys. And I think when I started there in 1993 or 4, the average size unit was about 300 SAR units. The average size units now are up to 1,400 SAR units. And that is because then you can afford to have highly skilled people operating those units. So you can have a small piggery as owner, manager of the unit, with maybe very comfortable to live a modest lifestyle, and you could probably manage with 300. So it's a really difficult question to say to you, that's the number you should have. It really depends. If the piggery is part of a multidisciplinary farm, you've got sheep or you crops or something, it can probably afford to be a bit smaller. But then you're going to have a general manager on that farm, because one person can't do all the functions on a multidisciplinary farm. So then you probably need to be at 1,200 SARs to afford a manager of the caliber that's going to be able to manage that farm. So yeah, it's a difficult question. I've got friends that have got small little 20-30 SAR unit in the morning farrowing his sows because he's only got 20 or 30, and it fits his lifestyle. So it's I can't answer that question. Can't give you one number. It's a complex question.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
Janine, if I can jump in and add to what Peter said, I think from a very formalized commercial point of view, I would say 1,000 pigs is almost what you need to have to gain a certain form of economy of scale. But what we've also seen from experience is that people with 10 or 20 sows that do everything themselves and do it very well can be profitable on that business, because what we don't often like to hear is, but sometimes those guys can sell their pigs for 20 or 30% more than what I sell my pigs for, because he's in a very small, very defined market, and his profitability can be more than what my profitability is per kilogram. because he doesn't have that large amount of overheads as what we do, and he's got a closer market and a defined market. But I would say as long as you can afford the infrastructure, the water, the fences to run a good farm, if you can cover that, that's important. Because as Peter said, there's a big answer. What do you want to achieve? Where do you want to be? What do you want to be? How involved? But that's 20 is viable if that's what you want to do, and if that's what you do by yourself and you want to take care of yourself. But on a large scale, 1,000 sows, and in a maybe more informal, like Peter said, 250, 300 sows can already be a sizable farm. But it's Africa. We get to do things here that nobody else can do. And I think that's why Peter is hesitant to give an answer, because people run a 20 sow unit and they make their money out of it.
Janine, I think the one thing we haven't covered in this do's and don'ts, ESG is becoming a really important, so environment, social, and governance. So a lot of these banking institutions are beginning to ask, I was asked personally the other day, where's your water license? Where's your EIA? So when you're starting to look for formal funding, it's becoming a really important aspect. And leading from there is, I don't know, I'm sure you are aware that the country is divided into different water catchment areas. So the amount of water that you're allowed to abstract is dependent on the water catchment area that you're in, number one. And number two, then the number of hectares of land you have. So what is happening is that a lot of the piggeries, so I said I started consulting in the pig industry in the early 1990s. We used to visit a lot of small pig farms, 50, 100 sow units, all the way along the Magalies Valley, around the cities. All of those piggeries are kind of disappearing because with the water requirements on pig farms, not only for drinking but also for cleaning and flushing, you need to have space. You need to have land. CP was talking about the various systems they have for managing the biodegradable waste that comes out of piggery, called manure sometimes, which you need to spread on lands. You need to irrigate it, or if you're going to make a compost, you either need to sell it or you need to work that compost back into the soil. And soil, you can't overdo it, otherwise you pollute the soil, you toxify the soil. So unfortunately, you also need a farm. You need space. The kind of a rule of thumb is around about 3 sows per hectare. So that's 3 sows plus their piglets. So if you've got 3 sows and they've produced 10 pigs, you've got about 30 odd pigs. So 30 pigs per hectare is kind of a rule of thumb, but it varies between the different catchment areas. So I don't want any one of the participants to go away saying, well, that's, that I can keep 30 pigs on a hectare. It depends on your catchment area. So you unfortunately also need land. So it's not only the money and grants, but you also need land.
Because I think there's a misconception that you don't actually need a huge amount of space to run pigs. But then I think people don't consider the fact that you have something like manure management for which you need space, as you just elaborated on. I'm just going to check quickly some of the questions. Sorry, I'm just reading. So somebody asks, and I think this might be a little too broad, but which feed is best? And what is the benefit of corn and hominy chops? Pierre, maybe you can answer that.
Sure, Janine. Yeah, I think the most expensive feed is the best. And the most difficult question on pig farm is how do you balance cost versus performance? So, and that's the reality. The best feed is the most expensive. And the worst feed is the cheapest. So diet is what we've seen, rand per kilogram, rand per nutrient value is the best. So you've got a combination of soya, maize, bran mixed with your different vitamins and minerals that goes with that. And that gives you a fairly good chance of relatively good production per cost value. So we know, although maize is very expensive, it's still a fairly cheap source of energy. Hominy chop is not used that much in pig farms because the nutrient value that you get out of that is different than what you do on a ruminant. So we talk about the digestible energies and proteins, etc. So the different crops or product is utilized different by various animals. So what's good for cattle is not necessarily good for pigs. I think the most critical thing is do not feed cheap swill. Right? We know pigs can eat anything, but I always use the example that so can humans. Right? So if you put me in a pen, I can't go anywhere else in my room. I will also eat it. I will live and I will probably grow. I will also get sick and a few other stuff. I wouldn't be happy. And the same with the pigs. Just because they can eat anything doesn't mean they should eat anything. And doesn't mean you should feed it to them. They don't like it. They're like humans. They like a proper balanced diet. They want to have nice pronitro with water, something similar to that. And then they're quite, in Afrikaans we say, hulle is baie dankbare diere, right? So whatever you give them, they use. If you give them crap, they will not grow well. If you give them good quality food, they will grow well. So that's also a place where you can't really save a lot of money, but you can be clever by what you feed. And we always, and I think Peter will, it's almost a weekly or monthly exercise to determine the best and the most cost-effective feed to use, as long as you still meet the requirements of the pigs. It changes. A sow in lactation needs different feed than a boar standing just waiting to mate females, and a young gilt being developed to become a productive sow has much different needs than a pig you are just raising to be slaughtered. So yeah, probably you're going to struggle to get away from the grains. That's the best bang for your buck, and please don't feed swill.
So, and then another question says, what medications would be necessary in weeks 10 and 18?
I guess that's for the vet.
Yeah.
So the ideal is no medications, absolutely no medications. So, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about buying, you know, these SPF or high health farms. You know, they would use limited amounts of medication. So the medications are that you would need, or the vaccines for that matter, because we prefer vaccination to needing to medicate. So they would be relatively farm specific. There are a few general diseases that just about all pigs have. One of them, if you're looking at the breeding herd, is parvovirus, leptospirosis. So there's a vaccination for that, which prevents the development of the disease in sows that are pregnant, and so reduces the incidences of stillborns and mummies. And then E. coli, which is a enteric bacteria, causes diarrhea. There are over 10,000 species known. All animals get affected by it, and particularly in our scenario here, baby piglets, either just after being born or certainly after being weaning. So a vaccination of a pregnant sow before she farrows with E. coli vaccine certainly makes the viability of young piglets better. So, I would not, but as you know, your medications that you use would be based on what diseases on your farm. So it's very difficult, unless you've got a health professional that's been there and knows what diseases on the farm. Polani to a degree, and Sepia as well to a degree, talked about buildings and infrastructure and stages of production. If you have cleanliness and hygiene and the right climate for pigs at the various stages of production, the chances that their natural immunity, their natural resistance to disease will be good, which prevents the necessity for medications, is the ideal. So when we talk about costing, and I don't want to go into like big details, but we talk about substituting costs. So you'd rather substitute capital costs of having a decent infrastructure to ongoing costs of having to treat animals because the infrastructure and the hygiene's not good. So when people are investing in piggery, get good advice. Rather spend a bit more money on capital and have good buildings than have to spend a lot of money on. So we talked about FCR as well. Sorry, I'm going off. I love talking about pigs. I'm sorry about this, but the feed conversion ratio is an efficiency factor. So we want, when pigs eat, all they must do with that feed first is stay alive, and the second thing is to grow. Now, if you've got a cold building, they're going to use that feed to stay alive, then to keep warm, and then only then to start growing. So if you spend the capital and have a decent building that the pigs are comfortable in, then all the feed that you now have to give them every single day, that ongoing cost is going to making them grow faster, which means that you're getting a return on that investment. So we call it substituting costs, certain costs for other costs, but good infrastructure from a health, hygiene, and growth point of view is very important.
Then another question is, at what size piggery would one need an EIA? So obviously in Biffa, would it, I don't know who wants that.
No, the current legislation is that if you have more than 250 pigs that are not suckling pigs, you need to have an EIA. So you take the total number of pigs, but not the ones that are still sucking on their mothers. And if that exceeds 250, you need to have an EIA.
Less than 8 squares per animal triggers an EIA.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's in buildings and there's more than 250, if it's completely free range, higher than 8 squares, then you probably won't need it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you still but you will still need a basic assessment because it is considered as an intensive livestock operation, and then you look at the impact of natural resources. So again, as Peter said, one need to be very careful when you establish a piggery, because you might not trigger an EIA based on the facts, but you can be very close to a watercourse, and you've got an intensive livestock operation triggers a basic assessment. So when you then get 3 months down the line, you started building and you want a loan, the bank might say sorry. So, and that's what adds to the barrier of entry, is that you might need to spend a few grand on asking a specialist, can I build here? just to cover yourself going forward.
Sorry, if I may add in on that, on the
Yes,
EIA.
please.
So what we've also found is that even with the grants for even smallholder farmers, a decision has been made to say, if you are going to start a piggery farm and you want a grant even from the government, one of their requirements is going to be having an EIA. And another part is that at least the Department of Environment, they do provide assistance in terms of EIA. So for smallholder farmers, there is some kind of relief there.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, it's good to know. So someone asked a question about visiting a pig farm in South Africa, but I assume they mean a commercial pig farm, but that would be problematic considering biosecurity measures. Am I correct in assuming that?
I think the short answer is that it's nearly impossible. We don't allow visitors. I don't think any commercial farm allows visitors. There's even some points. Well, I don't even allow suppliers to visit the pigs. It's the vet and the nutritionist, and that's about it. So I know, Peter, maybe you guys training farms, maybe I don't know what's the situation there. Commercial farms.
So a decision was made, Janine. We used to have a joint venture, a SAPO, with a small unit that was on a big farm. It was called the Bainsfield Training Academy. And with the spread of African swine fever throughout the country, a decision was made to close that training academy. So at the moment, there, to the best of my knowledge, there's no training facility, pig farm, where you could just visit. But to replace that, what SAPO has done is we've got a online course in piggery management, practical training, called the SAPO Academy. So if you get onto the participants get onto their web browser and they type in SAPO Academy, it will come up, and then that gives so we do. So it's mainly done by our business development team, and their videos on various aspects of pig farming, including farrowing house technicians, how you go about farrowing sows and suckling, so it's all on the SAPO Academy. So fortunately, in this modern world, if we have electricity, one can use your computer. You can use your computer and mobile data. So a problem when they steal all the batteries out of the towers. But so the SAPO Academy would be the right place to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another question is whether it's acceptable or good to use grower feed for pigs between the ages of 10 and 18 weeks. I mean, I don't know. Is that what you're supposed to do?
Yeah, that's
that would be the right ration. I mean, the various stages of pig production. So we know, the nutritionists know what the ratios of different nutrients need to be to fulfill the need of pigs at different stages of production. So, for instance, weaner pigs need things like lactose in their ration. Because they're used to drinking milk, which has got lactose in. So, and they need a certain level of protein, and they need a certain level of energy. So a grower feed is pretty much the average type of ration right throughout the piggery. So if the only feed you can feed, or you only have option for one feed, then the grower feed would just about suffice. But, you know, at some point in time for little pigs, there's going to be too little protein. You know, for sows, there might be too much protein in the grower feed. But if that's the only feed you can get, the grower feed's okay. But it's much more efficient to be feeding the right type of feed. You know, it's like all of us, I'm a grandfather now, so all of us have been through those stages. You know what feed you used to feed your babies, you know what feed you feed them when they go to school. It's just the same concept, you know. So, but yeah, grow feed, yeah. So the pigs are, so as pigs grow, their requirement for protein changes over time. So you know, if you're only feeding one feed, you're going to be short of protein for a while, and you're going to be too much protein at a later stage. And that's wasteful from a cost point of view, because the protein component is the most expensive component or nutrient in a feed.
Okay. There's another question about outgrower programs. I don't know if anyone would like to elaborate on that.
Sepia wants to elaborate on that.
Yeah, Janine, I think that it's something that we've investigated and that we've worked on quite extensively and are still in the process of developing. So I think it is coming. There is definitely, and I saw the question, I agree, it is a good solution for emerging farmers. Again, part of that model is that you do need the land, the EIA, the water, the building for that to work. So again, it puts you in a quite a high barrier to entry, because one of the prerequisites for us to do the contract growers is to have all those, because you would never place pigs and feed into a building that is not up to standard, that is not Pork 360, ZA compartmentalized, doesn't have an EIA, doesn't have water, biosecurity fences. So yes, it is a solution. It's not a quick and easy solution. It will still need a fair amount of investment. But like Peter said earlier, and this is almost a well-known way of looking at it, is that it's easier to borrow money to build structures than to borrow money to pay the ongoing expenses. So if you get into pig farming, make sure you budget for the ongoings, but make sure you spend a bit more if you can to reduce the ongoings. And that it be the same situation with our growers. You'd still need the capital to put it down, but yes, I think those options are coming. Yeah.
Okay. So I think there's one thing that I've definitely learned, or the common thread throughout the conversation has been that there's no shortcuts to pig farming, and it's not a get rich quick scheme. Like the amount of capital that you need, the management that needs to be done. It sounds like it's a very intensive form of production. I just want to, because I see that our time is almost up, I just want to go around, I'll go to each panelist and just find out what you think, what you need to be a profitable pig farmer in South Africa today. So, Peter, let's start with you.
A miracle. Yeah, look, I think there's this, you know, the pig farming has gone through some really tough times. I mean, we started off in 2018 with Listeria outbreak. We got to 2019, and that was the first time FMD there was an outbreak of FMD, which interrupted marketing, particularly our exports. You know, then 2020 you had COVID, and 21 we all sort of, you know, maybe things will get a bit better. And then last year, 2022, with an unbelievable increase in feed prices, So pig farming has been really, really tough for 5 or 6 years. So to be profitable in the future, I think there are things that are outside of our control, and outside of our control would be our feed prices. Feed in South Africa is related to, unfortunately, to global commodity prices, and our global commodity prices are related to our rand-dollar exchange rate. So, maize dropped from about 4,500 rand a ton at the beginning of the year to around about 3,600 rand. But with a sudden slump in the value of the rand against the dollar, that's going to change. So what we need for profitability is we need some stability within our inputs, some more level of predictability. And I'm beginning to sound a bit negative, but also with the economy in the country and the buying power, I think profitability for pig farmers is going to be under pressure for a while. I don't see that changing anytime soon, unless some of the fundamentals within our economy change rapidly. The only way pig farmers are going to remain profitable is to be as efficient as possible. That's the only thing you can do, particularly on the feed side. You can't be wasting feed. You got to be making sure that your FCRs, your feed conversion ratio, feed efficiency is as good as possible, and try not to waste money on things you don't need to waste money on.
Planning.
So I think I would add on what Dr. Even just said. I think for farmers to be profitable, the only avenue that they could pretty much be in control of is what they are doing at the farms. And through our discussion, we have established that pig farming is quite technical, and different components feed into each other, from the feeding that you use to the type of breed that you have on the farm, and eventually the type of product that you want to take to the market. So at least on that part, on those three things, the farmer can be able to a certain extent exert some control. Even though when you look at feeding, like the doctor said, the type of control they have is limited. But then I think it also brings in another issue of the type of work that we are doing, where we're looking at a way of sort of replacing some of the expensive ingredients that we normally find in pig feed. So when we look at avocado meal kind of things, and marula all cake meal, to replace the expensive protein sources. So those are some of the things that farmers can start to look at, to try and cap the high cost of feed. But then overall, try and make sure that they are able to control the different processes and systems that they have on the farm. I think that's what I'm.
Thank you. Pierre.
Janine, as Dr. Evans said now, currently and going forward, we are going to be in very tight, profitable or non-profitable environments. So it is tough. It's globally. It's not just South Africa. It is globally, and even the big commercial farmers are also struggling. So yeah, as you also said, if you want to get rich, don't get into pig farming. If you want to be a farmer and you really love what you do, then definitely get into pig farming, because the first rule is you really need to love pig farming to get into pig farming, because it's not easy, it is difficult, it is never ending, but it's so bloody rewarding that it's sometimes worth more than the profits you make or not make. I think we've all talked about biosecurity, infrastructure, that you need that to be profitable. Otherwise, you're going to farm cheap and end up that way. So it is expensive to start. Just to touch on some of the questions as well, I think the right breed is very important. You can't go and buy a female from your neighbor and breeder and think you will be profitable. You need to have good breeding stock. You need to have the right genetics. People asked about the different breeds. There's many. I think if you have a maternal line, which is a landrace large white combination to start with for your breeding lines, that will cover your reproductive cycle, part of it. And then you need a strong terminal sire like your Duroc, but there's also composite breeds from the different breeding companies that are P-train derived or P-train Durocs or large whites, that is mostly driven towards feed conversion rate, growth performance. The Duroc is a very good grower. It's got very good eating quality and meat quality and taste, but the other, like the P-train, for example, has got a very lean carcass. So I think genetics plays a big part in profitability and having breeding females and not just a female to breed with. Feed, definitely. You don't need to feed the most expensive feed, but to be profitable, you need to feed good feed. I think to be innovative and creative will definitely be part of being profitable, because I said there's no way you can farm well without grains, but that might not be right. You can farm well with alternative feedstock, alternative proteins, as long as it's trustworthy, safe, stable, contains all the nutrients. So I think creativity and innovation, especially in Africa, then marketing, and I think the consumer, at the end of the day, the consumer buys your product. And that's why we hammer so much on infrastructure and feed as well, because it ends up in the product. So if you have access to market where you can sell a product that is trustworthy, that is tasty, that is of good quality, eventually people will buy more of it. They may or may not pay a premium for it, but especially on the smaller scale farmers, make sure you've got an offtake, and make sure you've got a trustworthy offtake that you can supply with quality meat. And eventually, over the long term, you can be profitable. And then have the right mentors, veterinarians, people that know more than you to assist with your feeding requirements. They don't need to be expensive. They can be from SAPA, the BDMs, they can be from the ARC. Yes, you can read up. You must read up as best as you can. Knowledge is key. You can develop your own rations as long as you do it scientifically and with some assistance. Peter said, pig farming is very technical. It's probably one of the most intensive and technical agricultural avenues. So you're going to read up. You're going to spend some time reading up and engaging with people to be profitable. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. I think there was a lot of information shared during this webinar, and I hope that everyone has learned something. It will be available on YouTube, so if you want to go back and re-watch certain parts, if you need a refresher or anything like that, then you can please do that. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us and giving us your time and expertise. Yeah, it was really fascinating. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you to all our participants for joining us and watching. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. You can get in contact with Farmers Weekly via social media or through email, and we can try direct you to the relevant people who can help you with your queries. So that's it for this webinar, and we hope to see all our participants at least at the next webinar, which will be on poultry production. Thank you, guys. Bye.